The compound watchfires had been burning for 3 hours when Corporal James Whitfield first heard the distant drumming through the canopy darkness. Not ceremonial drums, boots. Maybe 200 men, moving fast toward the village of Mokhtar, where 73 Burmese civilians and 14 wounded British soldiers waited for the dawn evacuation that would now never come in time. It was 0247 hours, April 1945, northeastern Burma. The monsoon hadn't broken yet, and the jungle air sat heavy and black between the trees. Whitfield crouched alone at the trail junction 400 yards west of the village perimeter, his Enfield No.5 carbine resting across his knees. The rifle's barrel was shorter than a standard Lee Enfield, barely 40 inches overall, and men said it kicked like a mule. They called it the jungle carbine, with a sneer. Too light for real work, too loud in close quarters, couldn't hold zero past 200 yards. Whitfield had zeroed his at 50. That was the entire war in Burma, 50 yards of green shadow. 2 hours earlier, Lieutenant Hal Greaves had gathered the platoon near the aid station. The evacuation convoy had broken an axle 12 miles south. Radio contact confirmed they wouldn't reach Mokhtar before 600. The Japanese column pursuing them would arrive by 0400. "We can't hold the village," Greaves had said, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Can't move the wounded through night jungle. Can't expect air support before dawn." The order was to withdraw east, regroup, write off Mokhtar as acceptable casualties in a campaign already closing. Whitfield had nodded, saluted, then slipped into the jungle alone with 60 rounds and a canteen. Greaves hadn't stopped him. Everyone knew what White Feather did when Doctrine said, "Walk away." The nickname came from the Kachin scouts, who'd noticed the pale shock of hair visible beneath his slouch hat. They said it made him easy to spot. Whitfield figured that was the point. If you could see him, he'd already seen you. Now he waited, breathing shallow, listening to the cadence of boots grow louder. The Enfield stock was warm against his palm. Regulation said the carbine was inferior to the No. 4 rifle, lighter bullet, less accuracy, wandering zero from that flash-hider design flaw. Whitfield had filed the sights himself, hand-fitted the stock, learned where the rifle wanted to shoot instead of where it should. The first Japanese scouts appeared at 3:09. 3 men, moving in disciplined silence. Whitfield watched them pass within 30 feet of his position. Standard Doctrine said, "Interdict the scouts, disrupt their intelligence." Whitfield knew better. Killing them early would alert the main column to defensive positions ahead. They'd deploy, flank, overwhelm. He let them go. Let them report back. Village undefended, trail clear, proceed at speed. He wanted them running, not thinking. At 03:23 the main column came. Whitfield counted cadence by bootfall, roughly 200 men, moving fast in stacked trail formation, confident. They passed within 30 feet. He didn't move, didn't breathe, let them go. At 0334, Whitfield opened fire, not at the column's front but at its rear. The Enfield's sharp crack shattered the night. 1 man down, reload, second shot, another man dropped. The Japanese column halted, confused. They'd passed the junction. The firing was coming from behind them. Whitfield shifted position 40 yards north, fired twice more from a new angle, then went silent. The column's rear guard began shooting blindly into the jungle. Whitfield counted 12 wasted magazines before their officer imposed discipline. He could hear the shouted commands, sharp and furious. They were trying to understand a sniper who wouldn't stay put. In Mokhtar, Corporal Davies heard the distant rifle reports and looked at Lieutenant Greaves. "That's Whitfield," Davies said. Greaves stood at the village perimeter watching the tree line. The withdrawal order was clear. They should be moving east already, putting distance between themselves and the Japanese advance. Instead, 1 man with a jungle carbine was buying them time they weren't supposed to want. "He's splitting them," Greaves said quietly. At 0349, the Japanese column split. Half continued toward Mokhtar, half turned back to hunt the sniper. Exactly what Whitfield wanted. He'd just cut their assault force in half without them realizing it. The hunting party spread into the jungle, methodical and angry. Whitfield became a ghost. The Enfield's lightness, what riflemen mocked as a liability, meant he could move fast between shots, slipping through bamboo thickets where men with full-length rifles snagged and cursed. At 50 yards, the carbine's accuracy was surgical. At 0356, he dropped their officer. The man had been giving hand signals, organizing the search pattern. Without him, the formation hesitated. At 0401, their sergeant. The second in command had tried to take over, voice too loud in the darkness. Whitfield put him down mid-sentence. By 0409, the hunting party had stopped hunting. They'd gone to ground, hiding, 57 rounds in his pouch, 57 chances to prove the rifle worked when everyone said it couldn't. Back in Mokhtar, Greaves made a decision that would haunt regulation manuals for years. He reversed his withdrawal order. "If Whitfield's buying us time," Davies said, "we'd better use it." 28 soldiers and 40 Kachin irregulars began digging in along the village perimeter. They couldn't win a straight fight against 200 Japanese infantry, but they didn't need to win, just hold until dawn. And now they were only facing 100 men, disorganized and cautious. Greaves understood what Whitfield had done. Not defending ground, defending time. In the jungle, Whitfield was already moving again, circling east toward higher ground. The hunting party behind him was blind, shooting at shadows. He'd used 11 rounds, 11 men down. The math was simple, brutal, and completely contrary to what the instructors had taught about jungle carbines. The rifle wasn't supposed to work like this. Too light, too loud, too unreliable. But the targets kept falling. The Japanese lead element reached Mokhtar's perimeter at 0418 and found it defended. Lieutenant Greaves watched from behind a sandbagged position near the aid station. 100 men against his 68 defenders. The odds weren't good, but they were better than 200 to 68. He could see muzzle flashes in the tree line, hear the officers shouting orders to probe the defenses. They were cautious now. Something had them spooked. Davies crouched beside him, loading magazines. "How long can we hold?" "Until dawn," Greaves said. "That's all Whitfield bought us. That's all we need." The assault came in waves, probing attacks, testing for weak points. The Kachin irregulars held the north flank, their knowledge of the terrain turning bamboo thickets into killing zones. The British soldiers anchored the center, disciplined fire keeping the Japanese at distance. But it was grinding work, ammunition expenditure climbing, men getting tired. 400 yards west, Whitfield had found his next position, a fallen teak trunk overlooking the trail the hunting party was still searching. He'd counted their numbers, 46 men, now leaderless, now scared. At 0441, they found his previous firing position. He watched them discover the spent casings, the marks where he'd lain. Watched them spread out, thinking they'd cornered him. Then he opened fire from their flank. 3 shots, 3 men down before they even understood where he was. The hunting party broke, running east, away from the village, away from their own main force. Whitfield let them go. They'd lost the will to fight, and fear was more valuable than corpses. 23 rounds expended now, 23 confirmed kills. Numbers that shouldn't be possible with a rifle the army considered marginal. He moved again, this time toward Mokhtar itself, staying in the shadows. The Enfield's barrel was hot, the stock damp with condensation. He could feel the rifle's quirks now, how it pulled slightly right above 70 yards, how the flash hider's blast was sharper in humid air, how the bolt needed a firm hand in rapid fire. The rifle had become an extension of his hands, not despite its flaws, but because of them. Because he'd learned to work with what it was instead of what it should be. At 5:03, Whitfield appeared inside Mokhtar's perimeter, moving like smoke through the defensive positions. Soldiers startled, then recognized him. Davies saw him first, grabbed Greaves. The lieutenant met Whitfield near the aid station. The corporal's face was streaked with mud, his hands steady. He ejected his rifle's magazine, 3 rounds left, and looked at Greaves with calm, tired eyes. How many? Greaves asked. 57 verified, Whitfield said. Maybe 12 more uncertain. Greaves stared. 57 rounds, 57 men, in 90 minutes of jungle darkness. With a rifle that experts said couldn't hit reliably past short range. The rest broke west, Whitfield added, won't reform before dawn. The assault on Moktor stalled at 5523. The Japanese, already under strength, facing stiffer resistance than expected, began pulling back to regroup. They'd lost their momentum, their numerical advantage, their confidence. Do you think you'd trust the official methods, or trust what your own hands and eyes tell you works? Comment which side you'd choose, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. Dawn came at 0547, grey light filtering through the canopy, and with it came the sound of truck engines from the south. The evacuation convoy, axle repaired ahead of revised schedule. Greaves stood at the perimeter, watching the Japanese withdraw into the jungle. They'd lost too many men, lost their officers, lost the element of surprise. A dawn assault against dug-in defenders wasn't worth the cost. The village of Moktor would be evacuated. 73 civilians, 14 wounded, 42 defenders. Total British casualties, 0. Captain Morris arrived with the convoy, a staff officer from division headquarters who'd expected to find a massacre or an empty village. Instead, he found Greaves organizing an orderly withdrawal and Whitfield sitting against a wall near the aid station, cleaning his rifle. "Report," Morris said, his voice clipped. Greaves explained the tactical situation. Enemy column intercepted, split and harassed through the night. Village defense held until evacuation assets arrived. Mission accomplished. Morris looked at the numbers. 200 enemy infantry, 68 defenders, 0 friendly casualties. How? Greaves nodded toward Whitfield. Ask him. Morris approached the corporal, who was running an oiled cloth through the Enfield's barrel. The rifle looked unremarkable. Standard jungle carbine, slightly battered, sights that didn't quite match regulation. Morris had read the reports about these weapons. Temperamental, inaccurate, unsuitable for precision work. "I'm told you engaged the enemy throughout the night," Morris said. "Yes, sir." "Kill count?" Whitfield paused, considering how to phrase it. 57 verified. Morris blinked. "With that?" He gestured at the Enfield. "Yes, sir." "That's not possible. Those carbines can't maintain accuracy past 50 yards, Whitfield interrupted quietly. "I know what the manual says." The silence stretched. Morris was a career officer, a man who trusted reports and specifications. The Enfield No.5 had documented problems, wandering zero, excessive recoil, flash signature issues. It was a compromise weapon, issued because it was light and short, not because it was good. Davies appeared, carrying a canvas bag. "Sir," he said to Morris, "might want to see this." Inside the bag, 63 spent .303 casings, collected from Whitfield's firing positions by the Kachin scouts who'd followed his trail at first light. They'd marked each position, documented the sight lines, counted the kills. 63 rounds fired, 60 verified targets down, 3 rounds remaining in his magazine. Morris looked at the casings, then at Whitfield, then at the rifle that supposedly couldn't do what the evidence said it had done. "I'll need this documented," Morris said slowly. "Yes, sir," Greaves replied. What Morris didn't say, that documentation would be a problem, because it contradicted testing data. Because it suggested that field modifications and individual skill could overcome design limitations. Because it raised uncomfortable questions about whether the army knew its own equipment as well as it thought. The convoy began loading civilians and wounded. Whitfield stood, slinging the Enfield across his shoulder. The rifle had killed 57 men in one night, had changed a battle through precision instead of volume, had proven that sometimes the official specifications mattered less than the hands holding the weapon. A Kachin scout approached Whitfield, speaking softly in accented English. "Jungle silence," he said, touching the rifle's stock with respect. Whitfield looked at him, questioning. You make the darkness speak once and vanish. Jungle silence. The name stuck. The after-action report took Captain Morris 3 days to write. He sat in a tent at division headquarters, surrounded by technical manuals and ballistics data, trying to reconcile what had happened at Mokhtar with what should have been possible. The Enfield No.5 jungle carbine had known defects. The flash hider created excessive muzzle blast. The lightened barrel wandered from heat. The shorter sight radius reduced accuracy potential. Field testing had documented all of this. Yet Corporal Whitfield had achieved a hit rate that exceeded expert marksmen using Regulation No. 4 rifles under controlled conditions. Morris interviewed Whitfield personally, taking notes as the corporal explained his modifications: filed sights, hand-fitted stock, adjusted trigger pull. Nothing dramatic, nothing that violated regulations technically, just careful, incremental refinement based on how the rifle actually performed instead of how it was supposed to perform. You zeroed at 50 yards, Morris said. Why? Because that's the war in Burma, sir. You don't get long shots. You get short, fast encounters. The carbine's light enough to move with. The recoil's sharp but manageable if you know it's coming. The flash hider's loud, but that works for me. Makes them think there's more than one shooter. Morris wrote carefully, aware that he was documenting something that would make his superiors uncomfortable. The manual says the No.5 is unsuitable for precision work. The manual's written by people who test rifles on ranges, Whitfield said quietly, not in jungles at night against moving targets. There it was, the central tension that Morris couldn't ignore. The secret wasn't that the Enfield No.5 was secretly a perfect rifle. It wasn't. It had real flaws, real limitations. The secret was that those flaws mattered less than doctrine said they did, and that individual competence could turn an inferior weapon into something devastatingly effective. Morris included the ballistics analysis in his report. 63 shots, 60 confirmed kills, 3 remaining rounds. He included witness statements from Lieutenant Greaves, Corporal Davies, and 3 Kachin scouts. He included the tactical breakdown, how splitting the Japanese column had changed the entire engagement, how precision harassment had achieved what a defensive stand couldn't. What he didn't include, his own conclusion that the Army's testing methodology might be fundamentally flawed. The report went up the chain. Division acknowledged it. Corps filed it. Army Ordnance noted it with interest and then recommended no changes to current rifle doctrine. Because accepting Whitfield's success meant accepting that expertise and adaptation mattered more than specifications. It meant trusting soldiers to modify equipment. It meant admitting that official testing might miss variables that only appeared in combat. It meant institutional humility, and institutions don't do humility well. Lieutenant Greaves read Morris's final report and felt a quiet frustration. Everything was documented, everything was true, and nothing would change. "They're going to bury this, aren't they?" Davies said. "They already have," Greaves replied. But among the soldiers who'd been at Mokhtar, the story spread differently. Not through official channels, but through the informal networks that carried real knowledge through the ranks. The story of Whitefeather and jungle silence. The story of 57 rounds, 57 kills, and a rifle that worked because one man learned to work with it. Whitfield himself said little. He cleaned his rifle, checked his zero, and moved on to the next patrol. The Enfield remained temperamental, loud, and technically inferior, and it remained absolutely deadly in his hands. The war in Burma ground on through the monsoon and into autumn. Whitfield continued to use the Enfield No.5, continued to achieve results that made officers uncomfortable and earned quiet respect from those who fought beside him. The rifle developed a reputation independent of official doctrine. Jungle silence became something whispered about in forward positions, a reminder that sometimes the best tool is the one you know how to use. In September 1945, 3 months after the war ended, Lieutenant Greaves, now Captain Greaves, was invited to contribute to a tactical review of jungle warfare. He submitted a detailed analysis of the Mokhtar action, including full documentation of Whitfield's engagement. The review board thanked him for his contribution and excluded it from the final publication. Too irregular, they said, not representative of standard tactical doctrine, potentially misleading to junior officers. Greaves understood. The truth was inconvenient. Whitfield had succeeded by ignoring expert opinion, by trusting his hands and eyes over manuals and specifications. That wasn't a lesson the Army wanted to teach, not because it was wrong, but because it was impossible to systematize. You couldn't train doctrine breaking. You couldn't manufacture quiet competence. You couldn't test for the kind of judgment that knew when to follow orders and when to slip into the jungle alone with 60 rounds. But the story persisted anyway. In 1953, a military historian researching sniper tactics during the Burma campaign found Morris's after-action report in the archives. He included it in a paper on unconventional marksmanship, noting that Whitfield's achievement remained unexplained by contemporary ballistics understanding. The paper circulated quietly among small arms researchers who debated whether the Enfield No.5's defects might, under specific conditions, create unexpected advantages. They never reached consensus. In 1967, Whitfield, now a retired schoolteacher in Kent, received a letter from a young lieutenant in Vietnam asking about jungle carbines and night shooting. Whitfield responded with careful, practical advice. Know your rifle, know your range, trust what works over what should work. He didn't mention jungle silence by name, didn't need to. The principle was the same across wars and weapons. The Enfield No.5 was withdrawn from service in 1947, its defects deemed too problematic for continued use. Thousands were scrapped or sold as surplus. A few found their way into private collections, where they were appreciated for their compact design despite their documented flaws. One of those rifles, serial number marked, stock hand-fitted, sights carefully filed, sits in a military museum in London. The placard notes its service in Burma, mentions Corporal James Whitfield's remarkable accuracy, describes the rifle's technical limitations and its nickname. But the placard doesn't capture what mattered, doesn't explain how doctrine and reality sometimes diverge, doesn't acknowledge that the best answer to what works is often try it and find out, doesn't admit that 73 civilians and 14 wounded soldiers survived because one man decided that official specifications mattered less than the mission. The rifle sits behind glass, silent now, a reminder that sometimes the tools we dismiss are limited only by our imagination, and that the hardest lesson in war is learning to trust what your hands tell you over what authority promises. If this story reminded you that sometimes the best solutions come from those willing to break the rules, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.